Welcome back, everyone. We're live for another week of Growing with My Fellow Growers. I'm your host, Jack Greenstock, joined as always by an amazing panel, and I'll throw it over first to Spartan Grown. Welcome.
Hello, everybody. I'm Spartan Grown. You can find me on Instagram at Spartan Grown, all one word, no spaces. Or if you don't do the social media thing, you can find me, or you can just shoot me an email at Gmail, spartangrown@gmail.com. I'm an organic grower at home here in Michigan, and at work at Mitten Canico, I'm a synthetic grower, so I can help you with either side of the equation.
Good stuff. Welcome back. And next up, we got the American one. Gonna change up the order a little this week.
Sorry, yeah. Hey, Jack and panel and everyone in chat. I'm the American one on the YouTube, and the American one _with_ Keens on the IG. I think most of you know where to find me. And yeah, I'm glad to be here today and looking forward to the conversation.
Happy to have you back as always. Just wanted to remind everybody to switch on over to the live chat. And like Spartan Grown, who always gives out the email, you can hit me up at jackgreenstock47@gmail.com if you don't have social media. Next up, we have Matthew Gates.
Hey everyone, my name is Matthew Gates. I'm an IPM specialist, and actually today I just posted a introduction to the Eurasian hemp borer that's causing a lot of problems globally, but specifically in North America. And if you're a cannabis cultivator, you should be aware of it. So I covered life cycle and identification, and I'll have a more expanded pest primer video with distribution, resistance management, and treatment.
Definitely looking forward to that. I think we had a question on that a week or two ago. So good information, and always happy to see your new content coming out. So thank you very much for that, and thank you again for joining us this week. Next up, Noah the Grower.
Hey, how's it going, everybody? Yeah, I'm Noah the Grower from Instagram with 2 E's. You can find me there. And most weeks here with everybody here. So yeah, I'm ready to get into it.
Thank you again for joining us. Next, we have Aaron the Grower.
What's up? Thanks, Jack. Good to see you panel members again, and good to be back again for another week. I'm Aaron the Grower, ATG Acres on Instagram, YouTube, and atgacres.com. I actually have some really exciting news this week. Kyle got to visit, so I hope we get to talk about that for a little bit today too.
Awesome stuff. And speaking of Kyle, we have Kyle from Predicative Breeding.
Hey, what's up, everybody? My name is Kyle Breeder. I am a cannabis breeder that typically deals with feminized seeds. If you're looking for those kind of things, I do have a website. It's the letter P followed by breeding.com. All my social media, Facebook, Twitter, which I'm still banned from, I'm trying to figure that out, and Instagram is Predicative Breeding. And yeah, anybody ever has questions, feel free to reach out. I do try and talk to everyone. And, I do a giveaway every Wednesday. So if anybody wants to be a part of that, you can do that too. And yeah, there's some big things happen this weekend, and it's exciting. I'm sure Aaron will shed a little light.
Really excited to hear more on that. And last but certainly not least, welcome back to Dr. MJ Coco from cocoforcannabis.com.
Hey, Jack. Yeah, it's Dr. MJ Coco. I am back. I had a little 2-week hiatus. I'm going to be gone probably for the next 2 weeks too, in the process of moving. So I hope everybody bears with me, but I'm really excited to move. And then I'm going to set up a cool grow and get growing. We are starting the plant training grow challenge over at Coco for Cannabis. So everybody should sign up for that. And I'm excited to be back for the show today.
We're happy to have you back. I had planned for this week because every so often I like to do a chat Q&A just to get into question and answer with the chat. If anybody has questions, to throw them out there, tag either at Cheap Home Grow or any of the panel members that you see in the YouTube chat or here with us tonight, and we'll try and get to those questions. But I wanted to maybe throw it over to Aaron or Kyle and maybe hear a little bit about that news, and then maybe we'll pass it to Dr. MJ and talk about what your plans are setting up in the new space.
Sweet. Thanks, Jack. I will shed a little light, like Kyle said. So as most of you know, I'm moving to Oklahoma, bringing my family out there to start a legal cannabis business. Been in California for 10 years. So this is sort of a huge shift. And anytime you make a huge shift, it's not easy. And anytime you're trying to build something awesome, it's not easy. So Kyle kind of saw that reached out and said, look, I want to be a part of what you got going on. I said, dude, I'm utterly flattered. And so we're sort of integrating powers here, and he's gonna be tagging along to Oklahoma. I got him on the ball and chain, and we're dragging his ass to Oklahoma. We're gonna be doing some big things, man, and we're talking like as early as the beginning of next year. So I really look forward to it. And I don't know, Kyle, you have anything else you want to say about it? I'm happy to hear your thoughts too, man.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I just want to throw out there that you know, I've been trying to find my way in the industry, obviously, and a lot of us don't have capital or a way in. Which is hard, which is kind of why, you know, I was able to at least get in the seed industry. I mean, it wasn't for the money, it just was a way for me to just be a part of the community. But yeah, I just kind of seen everyone was going to Oklahoma. I noticed Aaron was going down there, and, you know, I really respect what he does. He's a really good organic grower. He's very skilled at what he does. I would say that in cultivation wise, that he would probably outperform me. So I just have a lot of respect for what he does in regards to that. I'm sure I could learn a lot from him in some of those areas. And yeah, I reached out, and, you know, I think it's just, you know, like he said, I mean, it takes two really good people, you know, it doesn't take two really good people, but it's good to have good people on your team, and just makes things go a little bit quicker, faster, maybe a better outcome, you know. And we're both pro community, and we're, you know, we're just trying to give back. So I just think it's going to be a really good thing, and I'm really excited.
Perfect. Well said, bro.
Thanks, man.
Monumental moment of the Cheap Home Grow, one of the first business partnerships to come out of this, and I'm happy to see it, because I think that we've spent a lot of time together and we've gotten to know each other over these years, and it just makes sense to collaborate with people that you have common interests with, and you're both you know, thinking about going there, and I'm really happy to hear that. So I'm excited to see what the future holds for both of you. Aaron's harvest that I saw earlier this year at the beginning of the year when I went up and visit, it was much smaller then, and to see Kyle up there seeing them next to the plants, it's kind of amazing to see where it started and where it finished. So congrats, Aaron, to an amazing harvest and great outdoor season. Hats off to you on that. Do you have any thoughts just reflecting back on this year versus maybe last year? Because I know last year the fires kind of blacked out the sun for maybe a month, and this year it seemed like things went a little bit better.
Yeah, man, when the stars align, they align. Everything was hitting on all 8, and we just nailed it this year. Everything came through perfect, and just sometimes, you know, I downsized this year, and I think doing that was huge for me. You got to realize what you can handle and what you can't. And that's part of why Kyle and I are coming together is, you know, I can only do so much, and he's another amazing grower. And especially with the breeder talents. I mean, that New England rock candy is something out of this world, testing over 30% with cannabinoids. And so there's just so many things to look forward to. And yeah, and this year, it really was serendipitous in a lot of ways. You know, I've only been on the show for a little over a year, so I got you guys to thank for all of it. You know, a good portion of my recent success, you know, especially Matt, Jack, you know, I got a lot of love for you guys, and hope to work with all of you very, very closely in the future eventually.
I hope we never work on the thing that I specialize in, honestly.
You know what? I hope you're right. But I still hope you come visit.
Maybe only for setup advice, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'll help make sure it's not a problem. How about that?
He can set up a bulletproof IPM system for you, so you don't ever have to talk to him again.
There you go.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge for me is going from Boston to straight dirt, but I'm sure I'll be all right.
Oklahoma's a different state, man. I've never been, but I've seen.
No ocean, man. No ocean. That's going to be big deal.
I know. No more lobsters, man. No more.
No more Mexican food. That's good.
There's so many lakes and rivers, though. I'm sure there's other. You know,
I bet there's some good Mexican. I bet you there's some good Mexican food, because
I bet the Mexican's better in Oklahoma than Boston.
Yeah, I was about to say that.
Well, then I'm like wicked recently in the last couple of years obsessed with like smoked meat, and so I'll be doing a lot of that, and I'm sure, you know, kind of that area in Texas and all that's really good with that kind of scenario.
You're gonna be in heaven down there. Smoked meats, barbecue, anything of that sort. Down south, you're good.
Good fishing, right? Rivers.
Yeah, I'll be fishing down there.
Great fishing. I got a dozen cattle on the land, so we'll smoke a couple of those.
What kind of cattle did you go with?
We have Texas. We have Texas Longhorns, so they're like the most hardy, and they're pretty sweet.
They're short cows though.
Yeah, but they got them big old horns, man. That
Yeah,
they're
Even the
very
females.
intimidating.
Yeah, even the cows have them.
Even the
And that's
yeah,
the best
and,
way to go, I think, for protection.
And absolutely, and the cool thing is they're one of the few cattle that don't need like donkeys to protect them because of those horns. The coyotes steer pretty clear of them, other than the babies. But the mamas are pretty close to the babies. Like they do not leave their side. So they got it figured out.
Yeah, some of those fucking horns are really, really impressive. And dude, I mean, they go for big bucks, man. I've got a set mounted from when I lived in Texas.
My brother's wedding in Texas, that was like one of the focal points. The photos at the end, there was a set of longhorns just like hanging out, or not like a live bull or female. Apparently, I didn't even realize that the girls have them too. But yeah, people were taking pictures like all dressed up next to a giant ass set of horns.
But the females, they're still like fairly big, but like the males, they get some fucking impressive horns. If it's a really good set, it's probably off of a male, not the females.
I just saw a coyote the other day, so it is imperative that they have some layer of defense. But transitioning a little bit back to the questions, I got one earlier, at least who tagged me. I think it was Chris Webb. If I didn't, yeah, it was. Okay. They say, at Cheap Home Grow, do you think with CRISPR tech, we could genetically alter cannabis to be grown as a vine down my hall that will grow flowering buds at different times as a perpetual grow? Smiley face. So I think that might be like a little bit of a hypothetical. Like
I answered it in the
wishful
text. I
thinking.
said you could look at Japanese hops, which grows on a vine, I think is the technical term, not a vine, whatever. But maybe you could look at that because the cannabis and humulus are so closely related. But honestly, I think there's no guarantee, especially for like really integrated. I'm not a CRISPR expert, so I don't know, but I feel like
I would almost take the opposite approach. I think, yeah, it's possible.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know if anybody's going to work on it.
I think it would be better to do a breeding thing and rather than like CRISPR, because I feel like it would take a lot of, and that's not even going to be in the germline necessarily, right? So,
or just set up like a decent grow.
Well, vining traits aren't in cannabis. So if you wanted to really give it some characteristics that aren't currently part of its genetic profile, that's what they do with CRISPR. I mean, that's just genetic modification. It's a way to do very accurate genetic modification.
I think it'd be the easy part getting it to vine. I think the hard part would be to try to change the morphology of the plant to be vegging and flowering at the same time to be able to have a perpetual harvest. I don't know how they would even manage that.
That might be more delicate. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. That part would be the more complicated part, but I think you would do it with auto-flowering genes.
Or like, maybe.
And get them to be activated by, some other signal from the plant. I think you could do it, but I don't think that anybody's going to.
Yeah, like maybe the tomatoes, I know you can have grown on vines, and then they have an ever-bearing tomato. And I think some of those are vegetative areas of the plant, and then some of it is fruiting, like the ones that are just constantly, they put out tomatoes basically. Once they begin, they continue to put them out. So maybe you could do something with that. But I think this is definitely above any of our pay grades here, because I don't think any of us have worked with CRISPR or plan to. But
I've studied genetic engineering, though. I think you'd actually do it the other way. You'd take a plant that had all the other characteristics that you wanted, and you would genetically engineer it to produce cannabinoids.
Probably so, right?
Yeah, you would go that way instead of trying to change a cannabis plant to have the whole set of characteristics that it didn't currently have. So they can do things like that.
I have a question a lot more on our level, I think. Brian M. asks, has anyone on the panel tried 1212 from seed? I have not. I've always thought that I'd rather veg it for at least a few weeks and then flip it. So I've never actually gone 1212 from seed because I don't think it'll actually flower like any faster than if you vegged it for a few weeks. So
I kind of agree with that. It won't flip to flower until the roots tap out. So unless it's in a very, very small container, you're still got a week or so before it's going to start flipping the flower.
I have never done it because not that I would be opposed to doing it, but I am kind of opposed to doing it, but I've never done it because I'm in a plant count state. And what that means is that I have to my restriction is how many plants I have, which means I have to grow big plants, and flipping to 12-12 right away is not going to get me there. So I can't do
I'll
that.
say that I had some strains that were like from the equator, and I didn't put them into 12 and 12. But when I took cuts off of them, as soon as I saw that they were alive as a cutting, I put them onto 12 and 12. Because a lot of strains, that's their life. They haven't seen anything else but 12 and 12 from seed, from anything at the equator. So I would suggest that if you have straight seeds from the equator, because I've had ones that I didn't put on 12 and 12 from seed, and any kind of veg just makes them go berserk. Like within a week, they were over 6 feet tall. So
Day lengths
it
vary
totally
at the
depends on the
equator.
strain.
It's not 12-12 the whole year round.
At the equator, it is, Doc.
No, it's not.
It's like semi-close,
It's
but
like
it's not always
11
12-12.
and a half, then 12. Yeah, it's really
Yeah,
close.
it wanders back and forth off of it. It's actually longer at both when the sun's at the end of each sort of, when it gets up to the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, you have longer days there at the equator too.
Yeah, anybody who's running any kind of landrace or heirloom, I would suggest, and what he just said, and definitely go extremely short veg or 12 and 12 right away, because that thing will smash into the top of your roof of your tent or basement fairly quickly.
If it depends on
hold
where
on,
it's
let's
from.
get back to this for a second, because the day length of the equator definitely varies. The plants that are traditionally grown equatorially are photoperiod plants. They're not autoflowers. The autoflowering trait comes from extreme northern climates.
That's also true in cannabis research. In my review that I talk about how as they go from the haplogroup closer to the equator, it wasn't even at the equator, for the origin zones, as they grew when they got higher, the middle and the northern haplogroups were not sensitized to light. That's correct.
Well, they'll veg on the 12 and 12 for a spell, I suppose. But yeah.
Every single plant, autoflower or not, I've seen veggies under 12-12 from seed. It'll never just go straight from flower straight out of the sprout. Like it'll, like Doc said, it's gonna at least develop some root mass, hit the bottom of a pot before it starts flowering. So then at that point, if you have the ability to use vegetative stage, then you could kind of shape the plant or grow it a little bit bigger and get maybe some more out of it, unless you're going just for rapid.
It kind of reminds me of I was reading that I think in Israel they're growing plants typically in like that dwarf style, and I think we've talked about this a few times on the show about how sort of dwarfing plants can cause it can be economically the best move for a lot of like fruit bearing trees and things like that. I think that was the case, right? Because you don't have to put in as many resources to create a larger plant, and a greater ratio of the canopy space, I guess, per like gram or per ounce or whatever is going to be like fruit, right? So
yes,
it kind of reminds me of that sort of concept of growing the plants kind of short, stocky, those domestication traits, kind of like Brussels sprouts versus original, like where mustard comes from, right? They're very different.
Yeah, well, Brussels sprouts are a cabbage, but yeah, related to the wild cabbage family. Yeah, I agree with all of that.
Chinese cultivators have been growing in like small pots and keeping plants small and doing what people called like the Dutch table method, where they grow a bunch of, or like sea of green, as it later became known. That method has been around for hundreds or maybe even thousands of years, if the research that I've done is correct. And so it's something.
But even with that, I agree with you, Jack. Your first week there, you're running on 18 or even 24 hours of light, because only putting 12 hours of light when the plant is necessarily vegetating for the first week of its life, you're just losing out on quantum yield. So giving them more light, then it's not going to slow down the transition to flowers. So I think going, longer day length, at least for the first week, 10 days, whatever, you're not going to slow yourself down doing that in terms of the flip to flower. You would slow yourself down slightly in terms of quantum yield if you started 12-12 right out of the bat, like right when they broke ground.
Yeah, and to go back to the equator thing real quick before we go to, we've got some other good questions coming up. Like I know Breeder Steve works in Colombia, and it is close to 12-12, close enough that a lot of his stuff he has to keep under light so that he has like mothers in a veg area, and he has to run artificial light in those areas, and then everything else that's just basically he sets outside will go into flower. But that, is impending on the veg period.
Yeah, I think that's what Matt's talking about. The strains that are evolved more for middle latitudes are going to only be triggered once they get, less than 13 hours of light or something, because during the summer, they're getting like 15, 16 hours of light. So once they get down below 13 hours of light, they'll flip into flower. And in an equatorial range, the range doesn't vary that much. So yes, that still makes sense.
So we've got a few questions, I think, or maybe it's just one long question. Northern Grower 4466 says, when checking trichomes for harvest, do I take buds off top or bottom? Does it matter? And trying to decide if I should chop my first harvest tonight. And I'll pass that to the panel before I weigh in. What do you think, Aaron?
I was gonna say I definitely have an opinion on this. I like to look at a bud that's like, I'll take a cola. I mean, it depends on what you want to smoke, right? They all finish at different rates, especially for different strains. Like certain strains, the tops will be all done and the bottoms will be lagging behind 2 weeks. So it just depends. Like, okay, so if I know this strain finishes a lot on the top, I'm going to check a cola, like maybe 3/4 of the way down from the top. And I'm going to make sure that I'm looking at the bud, not the leaf. So when I'm actually examining it, I'm pulling the leaves away, potentially, and looking at the trichomes that are growing on the buds. That's going to be the best indication of when to harvest. And then personally, I like 10 to 50% amber trichomes, just depends on the strain. And what kind of high I want and what the conditions are. I'm an outdoor guy right now, so if it's going to rain soon, fuck what the trichomes say, let's harvest. Yeah,
Definitely agree with that.
Yeah,
That's a good point, Aaron. I mean, there's other factors that you can factor in your environment. You can factor in your situation, like, do you need plants that are behind it you need to push? I mean, obviously you're not going to harvest it like 6 weeks, like, oh, I got to do this. But I mean, rule of thumb is anywhere from 8 to 9 weeks. And then obviously you can, go off of that. Guys that do like I do that flush, they're going to want to have like a certain time that they can flush on. Certain strains you get to know better just by looks too, but there's a lot that goes into that.
I also feel like maybe the answer, because it can be variable, is to take a bunch of samples and try them yourself, maybe even dry them and cure them, do a little sesh. Don't you do that, Spartan, sometimes when you're cultivating? You take a little, I thought you posted recently a sample.
So I was gonna chime in too, and that's exactly what I was gonna say, is like, if this is a strain of your own and you're growing it for yourself, this is something I do at home that I can do. I can't really do it at work, but at home I can do a staggered harvest. If it's a strain that I'm growing for the first time, I have no experience with it. Usually I have an idea from the breeder of the finishing time. They'll put on the box or something, 8 weeks or 9 weeks usually for most strains. So I'll know at least that much information. So at week 7, I can take a bud and dry and cure it. At week 8, I can take another bud and dry and cure it. At week 9, I can harvest the plant if I think it's ready to be harvested by then. And then I'll have the samples of the early samples I'll already have. I'll be actually being able to smoke them before my harvested plant is really ready to go. And I can get an idea of both the high and the terp profile. You only need enough for a joint. So it's, one bud or something. And it's going to give you an idea of what that can bring if you harvested it at that time. So you can compare that week to week, with your 3, 4, however many samples you want to really go with it. Right now, what I'm doing now is I'll just grow it and note the harvest day. And then the next time I grow it, I'll say, okay, I wasn't super happy with the plant. We'll say, if I was super happy with it, I'll just go for the same harvest day or target. But if I wasn't happy with it, I'll be like, okay, maybe if I felt like I went too far with it, I'll harvest it a little bit early the next time, and I'll note that day and then figure out, well, do I like it better this time or worse? And then I can, adjust to that way, because you're going to keep growing this thing over and over. It's really the best way, because every plant's going to be different. Even if the breeder, thinks that they know for sure that it's this special day that it's going to be ready. I mean, give me a break, man. There's so much phenotypical expression. There's no way you can pinpoint it exactly. There's no way.
Definitely. I was just gonna bring up that it's a snapshot in time as well, right? And your predictive ability maybe goes up a little bit better if you've grown that, that cultivar before, and especially if it's like, an ongoing clone. But even then, like age, changes things, context changes things, environment changes things too. And
Yeah,
from that moment,
That's what I was going to point out. Every grow is different too. So it may have taken
True.
8 weeks on that other grow, but some factors may have caused it to slow, or it might take less or longer in the next one as well. So I think there's a lot of
That's true,
factors.
but that's where your grower's eye comes in, right? So when you look at that plant at
Yeah.
harvest, you kind of remember what it looked like. So when you see that again, you know what I mean? Okay, this is what it was like before. This is when it's, it's
Yeah.
ready to harvest.
That's what I think is really more important. It is because it does. I agree with Tao that every plant is a little bit different, even if it's the same strain, even if they're clones from the same mother. Every grow is a little bit different. Certainly from one person's grow to another person's grow with like different lighting, different climate, different, feeding and watering patterns and everything like that. All of these things can affect on the margins the time to harvest for different strains, especially the amount of light. I think. I mean, you can talk difference in several days compared to like an underlit to a fully lit grow. So yeah, I think it does come down to knowing your grow, knowing your plants a little bit, knowing what you like. But I definitely agree with what Spartan said. If it's the first time you're growing a plant, make sure you're not like harvesting it way too early, but cut different colas down in different times, wait a few days in between each one, keep track of that, cure it and dry it and see which one you like the best. It's really, really tough to like pull a sample and actually sample it in the amount of time that would like allow you to make a management decision like that on the current grow, because almost anything you do, it's going to take a while to get a good read on how the cannabis is after harvest. I mean, you need to dry it. You need to at least do, wait, cure, whatever you want to call that next process.
You use a Myers now dryer and get you there.
That's 4 days though. 4 days is still enough to change it, because I've had like hung dry stuff from like day 63 versus like day 67, and you could definitely, I think, in my personal opinion, tell the difference in that 4 days.
And not only that, I really have come to the opinion that the amount of time you're going to cure the bud or the amount of time you're going to store the bud affects now when I'm going to harvest it. If it's going to be in jars for a year, which is not uncommon for me at this point, then I'll harvest it about a week earlier than I would have otherwise. If I want to use it quicker, it's better to let it go a little bit longer.
That's a good point, because it will mature a little bit more in the jar for the earlier harvested stuff over that time period.
Really does. I've been paying attention to that lately. And it really changes it. The profile of the White Widow that I grew for NYGC has changed completely. I was going back and read some notes about a month after I harvested it, compared to using it now. That's like, 6 months later or something. Dramatically different. So it really does. It really does make a difference how long you're going to hold on to it, and if you're using it right away or not.
That was like my Doc Holidays. I harvested it and I was talking about how it was just all fuel, like straight gasoline smell. And the early like month or 2 months that I was consuming most of it, fresh after harvest, it was pretty heavy in that fuel still. But then when I saved the best nug of the harvest every year for 420, I go through and we smoke like the best bud, and it sits in the curador at 60 degrees and 60 RH. And over that year, the gas smell was gone and it turned into like pure blueberry. I went up to Sungrown 707s.
Yeah.
He had grown it himself, and he's like, "Oh my God, dude, this like he handed me the jar and made me smell it." And he's like, "You said this was all gas," and I smelled it, and it smelled like blueberry candy. And I was like, "That is a fucking crazy ass change." But
it's interesting. My blueberry smells much more like blueberry if you let it cure for at least 6 months.
Yeah, it comes out like a lot.
It definitely comes out. Or the other things like, I don't know, settle out and allows you to smell it more or something. But yeah, it changes. The flavor changes, the high changes, everything about it changes.
It's funny you said that, Dr. Coco, because as you were saying that was the thought going through my head was like, I wonder if it's like that terpene, like for example, beta caryophyllene really takes a long time to flash off, we'll say. And it's one that's usually the last terpene to hang around. And that's why most of the weed that came long distances ended up just tasting like pepper and shit, because beta caryophyllene was the only thing left.
Dude, I have a bud from the 90s. One of my OGs who taught me how to grow, he's like much older. It's from Thailand. From the 90s, it still smells fucking peppery in the little Altoids tin. When he popped it open to give me some seeds, I was like, holy shit, man, it's still peppery as fuck. So that one sticks around for a long time, for sure. But what you were talking about with the things flashing off, the alcohols and esters and other things that are not terpenes that make the fuel aroma. There are a few terpenes that contribute to the fuel, but I do think that there is some esters and alcohols that are more volatile that go sooner. That's probably why it smelled so gassy early on. And then the blueberry that was present just kind of was more dominant later on after the cure. But I was curious about Kyle Breeder. I think you're the one of the last people that hadn't mentioned your harvest time thoughts about this question that we had just a moment ago. They kind of were to refresh your memory, asking if you harvest everything kind of at the same time, like how do you and when to chop, because sometimes the stuff at the top is more developed than the stuff at the bottom.
Well, it's a good question. I mean, most things that I kind of do, or I'm sure maybe that we all deal with this. I mean, I noticed that the top definitely develops more than the bottom or faster. But because I'm doing seeds, I just harvest the whole damn thing. So I'm not too sure. I mean, I guess if I was just strictly cultivating flower, I mean, I don't really have the space to, or the time. For me, it's all about just like speed, so I don't really have time to chop the top and let the lowers keep going. Because I'm indoors, I'm in the city, so it's a little more difficult to do that. But yeah, I mean, if I had the option, I'd probably let the lowers go for a little bit longer. Especially if it's like medicine that I'm specifically looking for, or even just trying to give to other people. I think it's a good idea to basically to do that in sections like that. But for me, again, yeah. So like once I pollinate everything and I flip back to we talked about this last week, but I just flip right back to 18.6 and I just basically wait till the seeds mature and I just harvest the entire plant.
It's definitely a different process when you're growing for seed. I let mine go a lot more mature as well. And so what you're talking about with growing for flower, though, letting the lowers, like outdoor, if you're like Aaron's situation, you could harvest the top and maybe let the lowers go. But indoor, I think it, like we talked about last week with like the grams per square foot per year, it'd probably make more sense to get another harvest in that spot than to like chop the top, wait another few weeks, like take the middle, then wait a few weeks and like take the bottoms, depending on how big or small you let it go. So
I missed that conversation last week. I have some things to say about that. Absolutely. I think that it's a waste of time to harvest the tops just to let the bottoms get more light or mature. The issue is not that the tops are faster than the bottoms, and everybody says that, but that's not what's going on. It's that the tops were prioritized over the bottoms. They're all maturing at the same basic rate. You're not going to sort of be able to make up that ground. They're just underdeveloped. They're not developing slower. They're just underdeveloped. And cutting the top of the plant off and letting those buds get light is really, I mean, you have to go like another 6 weeks or something before you'll actually see any difference in that or any kind of improvement. I've tried it. It's just a waste of time. The reason you ended up with underdeveloped buds on the lower part of the canopy is you left too much undergrowth on the plant for the amount of light that you were providing to the plant. It's not really a type of a condition that I would try to recover from with additional time.
Yeah, I have a question.
For outdoors though, it fucking 100% works.
If outdoors you've got the sun and you're not going to reuse the space or whatever, that's a different set of equations. You're still not going to get much more if those buds weren't developed properly during the main.
There's more advantage. Phase. That's one advantage. It's not a lot more, but you still, it does improve the buds, and at the same time you get advantages elsewhere, like harvesting. Even with outdoor, it's a lot, especially if you're growing big plants. So if you can cut that work into thirds instead of all at once.
Yeah, outdoors is a totally different set of calculations. You're not going to reuse the space in the same sort of timeline.
I just wanted to make it clear so there wasn't
all the energy on the light.
I'll add.
No, I agreed with what you said on the indoor, but I just wanted to make it clear that listeners weren't confused. They're saying that because it is an effective practice outdoor.
I want to ask one? I think some of my strains, the lower buds, the plant continues growing at the tip. The lower buds seem to get, some of my plants seem to get more mature on the lower buds before the upper buds. So I don't know about any of this.
If the plant has enough light for the amount of buds that it's trying to grow, they'll all mature at the same time.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure if you scrog, I would agree with that, Doc. I'm pretty sure if you did a scrog and had a completely even canopy, I would think that the lowers that were buzzing.
Even if it's the buds are totally shaded out, they'll still be supported by the canopy growth and the canopy and the photosynthate produced at the canopy. The plant will distribute that to the lower buds if there's enough of it. If there's not enough of it, it will just distribute it to the local buds, the buds that are at the top of the canopy. So what's going on there is you have too many lower buds that the plant can't support with the amount of photosynthate that it's producing in the canopy. So if you had thinned out the undergrowth, you would have had sort of better success. But cutting off the top and exposing them to light will help eventually after like 6 weeks or something. It's just not worth it.
It definitely doesn't take 6 weeks. It takes like a week to 2 weeks, and I do it almost every harvest because I'm an outdoor guy. So I'm definitely not arguing, but I will just add my experience, which is that it takes about a week or two for those bottoms to fill out. And what you see is white hairs on the lowers and red hairs on the tops. And so that to me represents maturity and speed. So I say that those are slower, those lowers, and that they then gain that mass in that last week or two. So it doesn't take too long. If you're outdoor, it might be worth it.
I feel like a lot of it
if you're outdoors, it's going to work better too, because those leaves down at the lower part of the plant are still going to be photosynthesizing in a way that what happens in an indoor grow when you get a full canopy and the canopy really blocks out the lower leaves, those leaves stop photosynthesizing. They're not getting light anymore. And when you cut off all of the photosynthetically active areas of the plant during a harvest and expose a bunch of stuff that's never had light getting down to it in months, it takes the plant a while to recover from that and to sort of even develop, photosynthesis in those areas and to start growing again and supplying and building those buds out. So there's a big setback time if you're cutting off the top of a fully developed canopy. And that is, again, different in outdoor grow, Aaron.
Right. Like the light doesn't just go to the leaves that are right next to the flower material, and then like the photosynthate just goes right there.
Yeah.
Like that's not how the process works. It goes all the way down. The phloem moves through it. That's why aphids feed on phloem. There's a process that I think fundamentally people don't understand. And even embarrassing as it is to say, like conceptually, even I sometimes regress back and forget that like carbon is actually coming from the air and sequestering it through it's not coming from the soil, right? But like it's sometimes hard because as an abstract concept it's sort of invisible to us, and even our own like experiential biases can overcome us even when we know better.
That's one of my favorite high thoughts, to just be like high in a park looking at a tree and imagining myself how that tree assembled itself out of molecules of the air.
Yes, right.
It's fun. You have to be pretty high, but you can spend a good couple hours just contemplating that.
Matthew, I have an IPM question for you in regards to the sequential harvest, because what I was thinking was in Aaron's situation or in any outdoor situation, just the ability to prevent mold, I guess, by creating a little bit extra airflow. Like you have your heavier buds up top, you're taking off that row, and then you're allowing more airflow to that next row, which would then basically add on a little bit more weight over, let's say it's 1, 2, 3, 6 weeks, whatever that time period is. Outdoor, oftentimes people have it. But is it worthwhile for that consideration to try and just prevent mold and create more airflow?
It could be. Like I love to say depending on your context, but it could be very well. Because I've seen some chunky plants, and actually a couple of friends of mine were dealing with a problem related to mold, and they one of the things that they had to figure out was like how to avert that for the next grow. And that's essentially what they ended up doing. Same plant, same grow space, and they did thin the foliage a lot more, and it did work out for them. But that's again, and as I say this anecdote, understand that it's just N+1. It's not conclusive, right? Like
there's a lot of situational dependence.
You really got to try to predict it using parameters that you are able to quantify, right? So like when commercial growers and even like home growers have like ways to like assess the relative, not absolute, but the relative humidity, the leaf temperature, things like that. They can be proxies somewhat, but like ultimately you're never like making decisions with 100% of the information. And most people are making decisions rarely with a lot of quantification. And that's actually not an insult or anything. That's just a state of fact. Right.
I have a good question. So your buddies that were defoliating during flower, I've always heard, and I defoliate during flower, but I do it on dry days and usually in the morning time. I've heard that when you defoliate and you're cracking that petiole at that abstraction point, that burst of liquid can actually be the birth of botrytis, or like a situation where botrytis could then take hold. Have you guys heard that? Or
well, wounds in general, I think that's a really important thing to consider. Absolutely. I feel like that's theoretically possible, I guess, as like an inoculation zone, but I feel like there are more likely places of inoculation.
Let me
In a
ask you
general
guys
principle, though, like last week I mentioned in the greenhouse overgrown situation, like I would have super cropped versus topping the plant. It's like a hard half top. I'd rather super crop it and bend it over, where you'd have like a giant wound open or a bunch of tops, like cutting off basically the top. Like some people will literally go through with like an edger and just hacksaw the top of their plant to whatever height they decide and let it grow from
I have
there.
experienced that. I have worked with people who did that.
Yeah, I've seen it enough times on Instagram to know that it's
with an actual hedger. I want to see that.
With an actual, swear to God, hedger.
Oh wow! Oh God! Now I'm excited. I want to see that in like a big commercial operation. Somebody going through there with a hedger.
That was like their mom maintenance in one person's operation. Their moms were too tall. They just went through, boom, whacked them with a edger.
Yeah, for moms, okay.
When you guys defoliate, do you snap the leaf off at the stem, or do you break the petiole in the middle? Because if you break the petiole and leave a little nub, that shit will dry out and not. Well, I don't know. Which one do you guys think is best for preventative maintenance? Do you want that wound to be at the actual stem, or
I
leave half
agree
the
with you.
petiole?
I think clean scissors and cut the petiole. Don't rip them off.
I agree.
If you're going to do such a thing, but there's always ways to cut some leaves off. And
you guys are gonna hate my answer. I just raw dog rip them things off wherever they fucking lay.
If you can,
ATG, you get the threads. I hate the threads, dude.
You can rip it off without getting a thread. You can press down with your finger and it'll drop off.
Finger and thumb, and I don't do the thread. Finger and thumb.
There's like a it's like there's like a divot, and you can like snap it off in a sort of a clean way, but it doesn't always happen, right?
Right. Does leaving a petiole help to prevent pathogens from getting in?
It could be
vice versa.
Well, that necrotic tissue could be a problem. Instead of
I worry about that necrotic tissue way more than removing the whole thing.
If you snap it off at the stem, there's that wet moisture that, like ATG was saying, and botrytis lands on that. It's like closer to the plant. It's already in there.
It really depends on the pathogen you're talking about, really, and that's what it all comes down to, right?
Yeah, I was thinking just botrytis because that's my
this doesn't seem to be a very common method, as Matthew said to begin with.
Yeah.
Right? Like this doesn't seem to happen to people when they do.
Right.
The thing about botrytis that makes it super insidious. I love to talk about the endophyte thing, being able to go into the plant and live in it symptomlessly. We don't know how true that is for cannabis, but the thing for me is that botrytis, it has the traits that allow it to it can penetrate through the tissue. It has no need of a wound. And it does that really adroitly. So I feel like for botrytis specifically, probably not necessary. Similar sorts of thing for powdery mildew as well. Like they're
it was the liquid I was commenting on, just to be clear.
So
if
not
a
the
spore
abscission, but
or conidium, if some sort of infective propagule, like I'll give you an example, right? So I was working with some greenhouse growers. And the problem that they would deal with is that they got condensation on the greenhouse on the roof because it was at an angle, And what would happen is the condensate would form, and then it would drop onto these gerbera flowers at the edges of these rows. And what would happen is that the plants would get waterlogged, and the tissue, the leaf tissues themselves would they would literally drown. Right, the stomata would just would be like wet. There'd be wet spots, and that would lead to necrosis, and a lot of bad stuff happened after the crown rot that they dealt with, thousands of dollars, due to that. I could see how perhaps if you theoretically, if you cut a bunch of plants, if you made a bunch of wounds, mechanical wounds somehow, and some like condensate or water with a bunch of particles and possibly like pathogens that are just along for the ride, if those drop down and then that droplet of water passes over an open wound channel, maybe some establishment could happen there, for example. But I don't think it's important.
I would argue that living soil grown with a lot of beneficials, that the juice coming out of that plant already has endophytes in it that will prevent other ones from taking over, but I could be totally wrong.
The only thing about that, I actually agree with that premise. The issue is that, at least in the research that I've seen, that tends to be really, how do I put this? It's either functionally dependent. So maybe two different, an endophyte and a pathogen might basically, for lack of a better term, cancel each other out because one is in the space or in the niche or occupying the space that the other one has to have. And so there's there's sort of a zero-sum game there. It's either there or it's not, to like neutralize that possibility. But another endophyte might have absolutely no effect on a different pathogen. And so it's very context dependent there, right?
Right,
like,
they could coexist.
And what is beneficial,
understudied.
What is beneficial or detrimental can also change. With one snip, I was just talking with somebody on Instagram, I had an IGTV about microbial identification and like endophyte dynamics. And one of the interesting things is that, like, people think of fusarium, people think of all these other pythium, for example, and other pathogens, but there are groups of the same species, isolates, that are hypovirulent or even beneficial in certain cases, and they use the same machinery to like infect the tissue. The only difference is that the context change. Sometimes a mycorrhizal relationship is beneficial, and sometimes it's or I say mutualistic ecologically. But then it could shift. Maybe there's less nutrient anymore. Maybe the high cost of the photosynthate turn into hexose for the fungus's benefit from the plant relationship. Maybe that becomes a little bit of a steep price when there's a lot more phosphorus or whatever that the mycorrhiza is uptaking, and then it becomes kind of more like a parasite. It's not doing very much for the plant at that point, or the actual physiological dynamic literally changes. And we see this sometimes. And so I think it's really important that people, like, good diversity is important for the microbiome, but you also want to like verify that you have actual mutualists and not parasites as much as possible.
I wanted to give Spartan Grown a chance to jump in because it seems like he had a thought there and had been not able to get it out there quite yet.
Yeah. As far as the leaf defoliation, I'm 100% on board with leaf defoliation. And when we do leaf strips, we strip where we, like what Jack was saying, we bend it right down and it usually snaps right off pretty quick. As far as if you get a string, that's cut with scissors. You don't pull a string and try to string it all the way down the whole plant. That drives me insane. So yeah, if it doesn't snap, then you can just snip it with scissors. It's way faster that way. And we can get through the room way faster, just way faster. And it just seems a million times cleaner. If you have a bunch of cut at the petioles, those all eventually dry up to really hard and small little, I don't know, dried up petioles, and they fall down like, and they fall all over the fucking place and make a fucking mess. If they fall into the top of the soil and get wet, they'll mold, or mold will start growing on it. I've seen it. It's just not, no, we just keep everything clean and remove everything out of the room. And outdoor, same way. I do the same thing. And I don't know, I've never had bad results from doing so. So I continue to do it.
That's a good point.
I just wanted to expand. I saw that Jay Allen in the comments had asked that bud rot does not require a wound. There's a question. I kind of touched on it, but I just want to reiterate that a lot of these fungal pathogens, basically what they do is they have a little spore or whatever. They create a thing called an aprosorium, which is a little hyphal strand, and then a thing called a penetration peg. And that's basically a little strand that's got a bunch of enzymes that it secretes that lets it burrow into the tissue. And then from there, depending on the kind of parasite it is, or what stage of its development it is, it either siphons up the nutrients by sort of communicating with the cells and other sorts of like really intricate processes that I can't articulate very well.
Well, now that you got the chat fired up with the penetration peg, I just got to say, we've been on this question for a little while, so I just want to give my thoughts on it, and then we'll move on because we have a bunch of other questions that I'd love to get to, and we've got a bunch of listeners out there that I think would like us to get to their questions. So just to reread the question one more time, he says, when checking trichomes for harvest, do I take buds off the top or the bottom? Does it matter? Personally, I like to check the top of the plant. I stopped harvesting based on the trichomes alone. I like to wait until at least they're fully milky. If you get some amber, I don't panic and chop like right away. It may make it a little bit more sedating, but oftentimes it's not actually related to CBN. You'll see a lot of articles that say when you see amber trichomes, that's 100% sure CBN. I've looked at thousands of lab tests at this point, and there are pictures of the bud for the sample, and many times it's clear or milky or amber. And I look at a lot of the amber samples and I go down to CBN, and it's like 0.00% or 0.01%, and it could be fully amber trichome. So I think oftentimes that could be oxidized terpenes. That's my current theory, or esters or whatever. Something else in the plant is oxidizing and changing color, not necessarily the cannabinoids changing. Although older cannabis does get that reddish tone, and that does come along with CBN. CBN itself, when extracted, is like a reddish tone. You can convert THC to CBN just by heating it. And if you have pure THC and you heat it up in an oven for a long enough time, it'll convert to CBN. So that's the chain that it goes down: THCA to THC to CBN, just to kind of get that out there. But as far as harvesting, I do have the Myrbs now. I'm not sponsored by them or anything, but I do really enjoy it. I tried it versus the Curador versus my old hang drying method, and it won out in 3 or 4 harvests in a row. So now I just dry everything with that. And if I have a new strain like I do, Amy's Aces or Amy Aces from the American one, I'll harvest at like 8 weeks, 9 weeks, 10 weeks, and see what I like most. I'll take like a similar branch where I have like, the maybe less developed bottom buds, which I think once you dry them and cure them end up being just fine. But to go back to the herbs now thing, it takes like 4.5 days to go through their original cycle. I usually add another half day to a full day to that. So 5 or 5.5 days, and then it's smokable right then. So it is consumable. So you would have a good idea of like, okay, if I harvest it at 7 weeks, wait 4 days, 5 days, I get to try it. It gives you a good idea. But then for me personally, I like to jar it for a week. Just seal the jar, put it in the Curador for a week, and then I come back to it. And by then it's like perfectly cured. You could try it every single day from the first day to the last day. But after about a week, it's as good as it's going to be. And it stays about that same until maybe a month or two. You'll see some changing in the characteristics of the bud. So as far as harvesting, I think that you should, in my opinion, indoors, let as much of the white hairs turn red as possible. If your environment is dialed in, I think the plant will mature. And looking out, Frenchie said this and talked to a lot of cultivators in the Emerald Triangle, shout out to Frenchie Cannoli, but he said that most of them actually didn't use the trichomes. They look at the plant because you're trying to judge like the secondary metabolites of a plant based on when it's finished, and you could tell when it's finished by when in many cases, if the hairs have gone from that white to that red, the bud is filled out. Some people did like the slap test, they'd smack the bud, which probably ruin that bud or take some of the trichomes on their hand. But when you can squeeze it and you see that there's that density, a lot of people I think take it a little bit too early, maybe 1 week or 2 weeks too early. And sometimes if you just let it ride, let it go an extra week or two, you can get a lot more out of it as far as weight, and sometimes even the effect changes a lot. So I think it's worth doing at least once to try it. Then there's people that like the more uplifting effects, so you should also try harvesting it on the earlier end to see how you like it there, because everybody really is independent at the end of the day, so each strain's a little different. The whole light comment earlier with like, do the lower canopy develop at the same rate or not? I had a strain, 3 Point Stance. It was a Black Triangle GMO Mac, and the top of the canopy, I didn't scrog it out or anything, but I just had a bunch of spears, and there was a bud at the very bottom of the canopy that I left on there, and it was in complete shade, but I had enough light supplied to the top of the canopy that it developed as a similar size spear. It was a little bit different color, but it developed a nice, big, beautiful nug. So I definitely think that it is situation dependent, strain dependent. And if you get enough light to the top of the canopy, the lower canopy will develop full finished buds if you give them enough time to finish up. So that's my final thoughts, I guess, on that question. And then maybe we could go on to the next question. I think Doc would be able to. I actually am not familiar with this term, amorphous silica. So they say, I have a question. How available to plants is amorphous silica? What can you do to improve uptake?
I've heard amorphous silica is, I don't believe plant available. I don't believe it's plant food. They'll have to look it up. But no, I don't think that's a form of silica that is plant available. If anybody else knows about that, let's see what I can find.
So I did a cursory Google search just now, and it said, and as I put it into the engine, I get this top start part that says, amorphous silica is an inorganic material commonly used in semiconductor circuits. But I guess that's true for regular silica. You know, that's the silica that we use for circuit boards, right? I also agree with you. I don't think that's plant available. Maybe it gets, is that the same as saying it doesn't get sequestered? Because even if it's not used,
it wouldn't get it wouldn't get sequestered, or it wouldn't even get taken up.
Right.
Well, if it's used for circuits, it sounds like it might be expensive, so I'd wonder why they're using it. Do you have some large supply of amorphous silica? I forgot to copy the name of that person. Kyle Breeder said earlier that they've been on vacation all week and they need some time with the family. I hope that wasn't a private message, I guess. But Kyle, I want to give you a chance to give your final thoughts and shout outs before you have to get running.
Yeah, sorry guys. I just haven't had the chance to be with some really important people, and just been gone. But I appreciate everybody here. I appreciate what we do. I think we're going on 3 years shortly, and I'm sure we've helped a lot of people since then. I know I definitely get messages. And yeah, I'm really excited about what's happening. And like we talked about earlier, I'm going to move down to Oklahoma with Aaron. We're going to have some really epic time down there and have some fire shit going on. And we're both pretty excited about that. So that's really cool. But yeah, if anybody's looking for feminized seeds, I have a website, which is the letter P followed by breeding.com. I'm on all social media platforms, Predicative Breeding. And if anybody ever has questions, feel free to reach out. I do answer them. And Wednesdays, I do a giveaway. So feel free to tap in on that. It is free. So just trying to give back a little bit. But yeah, thanks everybody. I appreciate everybody. And I'll see you guys next week.
Cheers, and thank you, Kyle, from my family to yours. Got a family member growing some of Kyle's seeds right now. He picked his final 4 winners, so they're looking happy and healthy.
Peace out, Kyle.
Later, Doc.
Kyle.
Later, everybody.
Just jumping back onto this amorphous silica, I found one thing that says that it will increase the water retention capacity of soil. But the way that they're talking about it in terms of increasing the water retention capacity of soil definitely makes me feel like it is not uptaken by the plant. So it's not going to be a source of silica for the plant, but if you're in drought-prone soil and you want the soil to hold water better, they say that it may be a supplement for that.
And what else works for that is vermiculite, which I believe is actually able to be broken down and provide the plant some silica that it can.
You know what else works for that too? Cocoa.
All good options. I mean, I just want to throw them out there for the people because, yeah, the water retention thing is really impressive, both of cocoa and vermiculite. Growing from, I used to grow in like bag soils, like old school topsoil for whatever. And comparing that to something that has vermiculite or cocoa in it, you notice a huge difference. So it is almost like a different world of technology.
And both of them are cool because they don't just hold water well. They're like a chamois. A chamois is so cool because it'll suck up all the water, but then when you wring it, all the water comes right back out again. It doesn't like hold on to it. Cocoa and vermiculite are both like that too. They hold on to the water, but they don't prevent the plant from accessing it. So the plant doesn't have to spend a lot of energy to suck that water out of the cocoa or out of the vermiculite, which makes it's both the sort of ability to retain it and the ability to give it up.
I have a
I
great
think I've
question.
seen other silicon compounds being used or something related to that being helpful for plants, but I think that in this particular form, and perhaps there's other different physical chemistries with the same like structure, like structurally maybe it's different too. But like at that point, we're talking about physical chemistry, and I'm not a physical chemist.
Yeah, can microbes break down that amorphous silicate, whatever, to make it available, or we don't know?
You got to ask Russ Brandon for that extra special microbe that'll break that shit down for you.
Break down anything, right?
Maybe next week when he comes back on. But
Yeah,
we
I'm
do
not
miss.
sure enough about the chemistry behind it, even in terms of what it is, or if it might be more broken down, or it might not be breakdownable into a plant available form.
I have another great
Right.
question that I think the chat can, or the panel can all sort of jump in on, and it's a long-time listener and many-time question asker, Cade Armstrong. Thank you for your listenership, first of all. Cheers to you, everybody. I guess tokes up to Cade Armstrong. They've been around for as long as I can remember. Long time listener and a big supporter of the show. So cheers to you, Cade. They're asking at Cheap Home Grow, how far up your plant do you shave the legs? So I like that question. It's definitely an interesting one. It depends on your grow space 100%. For me, I'm growing in a 5-foot tall tent. I like to veg my plants about a foot tall with some low stress training and super cropping and maybe even some tie downs during the veg period. And then when I flip, I just kind of let them rage and then fill out the space. And if needed, I'll do low stress training and super cropping to maintain my height. And I kind of let the plant tell me where I need to remove stuff. So like sometimes you'll go in there and you'll see like, wow, this is just really weak and spindly and it's not going to make it up to the top of the canopy. And I'll just cut that particular branch. And then at about that level, I'll notice like a bunch of weaker leaves that tend to start dying off or getting unhealthy, tend to be on that lower part of the canopy. So I'd say anywhere between like 20 to 50% of the lower canopy, depending on the strain and how thick the upper canopy is, can be removed in my grow space. But I'd love to hear Spartan's thoughts on how much of the legs he shaves on his plants.
It's different inside or outside. If we're talking inside, I think that's what we're talking about here. I'm kind of in the same boat as you, and I do kind of the same thing. I usually want to anything for first and foremost, anything that touches the soil is gone as soon as I see that. So that's the first lollipopping or cleaning the legs or whatever you want to call it that happens, and that's at any time in the plant's life cycle. That's a hard rule for me. If I see it touching the soil, hell, if I see it touching the pot, it's gone. And then and that's just mainly for like pathogens and things like that.
I want to echo that that's a good idea.
Yeah, thank you. And then after that, it's like what Jack says, anything that is really, once I'm into flower, a week or two into flower, and I have branches that are coming from the bottom of the plant that are less diameter, less girthy than my pinky, they're gone. I want girthy branches. I don't want this fucking thin branches. Not what I need. I like big girthy fucking branches that hold big girthy buds. So all the small little bullshit branches go. And as far as foliage or leaves, it's really, for me, it's like how I'm watching the plant and how it develops, but it's how many nodes do I have from the top. If I'm down to like the 6th, 7th node, those usually are coming off, because the nodes above it are going to be fucking going to make it so that these ones at the bottom don't even develop. I just know that from experience, from growing these strains. And that's another thing, is like, as you grow these things, you can make these micro adjustments for the next grow. You can be like, oh, the last bud, when I harvested this plant, the bud at the very bottom of my plant was pretty damn big. I'm going to not skirt it as much next time, because I think I can squeeze more yield out of this if I would have left more. So there's no hard rule. It's always what happened last time and adjust. And I guess that's my best answer.
Yes, I'm definitely packing on the bottom better than others. Doc, do you have any thoughts on the shaved leg situation? How much you like to remove?
I think about it from the other side. So I think about the thickness of the canopy that I want to leave behind. And the thickness of the canopy that you can support depends on the average PPFD that you're delivering to your canopy. So if you're delivering above 700 micromoles of average PPFD, which is sort of what we recommend, then you should be able to support a canopy that's 18 inches thick. So 18 inches deep of canopy. If you have a average PPFD that's lower than that, that's, you know, around 600 or maybe 500 to 600, I would do like 12 inches or less. This is exactly sort of related to our other question about the larvae bud at the bottom of the plant, right? It has to do with how much light you're delivering to the top of the plant. If you're in a CO2 enriched environment and you're given 1500 micromoles or, you know, an average PPFD of like 1200, then you could probably do, you know, 24, 28 inches of canopy at the top of the grow. And, you know, so you work down from the top and you think about how thick of a canopy can you actually support with the amount of light that you're delivering to those plants. And yeah, I think the best way to deal with that is average PPFD. I kind of think about that. I sort of am thinking about it, you know, based on my own experience, but that's what I do. And definitely noticed when I increased the average PPFD up towards, you know, above 850, I was able to get a much thicker canopy with good sized buds all the way to the bottom of that canopy.
That's a good point. No other grower's got his hand up, so I want to let him jump in here.
Yeah, I have definitely have thoughts on this. So, okay, every plant's different. Number one, it's going to be how much your light penetrates, you know, your canopy, obviously. And you're going to know that over time, having used that light. Obviously, it's strain dependent. Obviously, it depends on how much you're going to spread your plants out, how much you're going to do with it. But I would almost always recommend doing a very fair amount of trimming the skirt up. If your plants are bigger, if you have little teeny plants, like, you know, your plant's only like 2.5 feet tall. Yeah, you know, because most light's not going to penetrate as far as people think, especially if you have it pretty thick on the top. So, I mean, here in the next like couple months, my light will switch and I'll be able to go live in a room and I'll show. I always make sure my skirts are high, and you know, it definitely, I think, creates less work when you're trying to get as many harvests in a year as you can. I mean, there's different strains that like you're saying that are going to have some buds that are smaller at the bottom, but you know, my rule of thumb is to kind of, you're going to get better airflow underneath there. You're going to have less surface matter for pathogens and for your IPM. There's just a lot of advantages to it. Less trimming of larvae buds, or, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, the advantages are great when you trim up the skirts high.
So I think that Doc said like 28 inches or like between like 2 to 3 feet of solid canopy. I haven't been able to pull off much more than, you know, 2 feet of really solid canopy, and then that last foot might be like B buds or C buds, maybe even D buds, if we're being honest.
Hold on, I didn't say that. That's way more than I said, Jack.
Oh,
I said 18
to
inches for most growers.
Oh,
if your max PPFD is 1,000 micromoles with GWR and a non-CO2 grow, I wouldn't leave more than 18 inches of canopy.
Yeah, I guess
I think 2018 is pretty ideal.
No,
I've got a bunch of CO2 in my grow, and I've mentioned in the past, I guess I don't enrich. I just have cats that live in my house, and I checked. I was lucky enough to have a guy, Michael, shout out to you, one of our listeners. He sent me a CO2 monitor for free just to test my environment, and I did for a few weeks, and 1,300 was the lowest it ever got. And
okay, but you also need to
high
have high PPFD with that high CO2.
Yeah, and I do run between, it depends on cultivar, like Noah was just talking about, because if I have a cookie plant, they don't like any more than like 500 to 750, even with the high CO2. Like they just, if they're heavy cookie influence, that strain, it just doesn't seem to like a lot of light. Where a lot of other strains, in my experience, like a lot more light. But for whatever reason, cookie crosses don't tend to love high light environments, even with lots of CO2. But I'm curious, Spartan, I know at your commercial cultivation, I look at the stacks and I see that there's like at least 3 rows of trellis. They're usually between like 6 or 8, maybe. I don't know how far apart they are. But when you guys are doing that 3+ a light with certain strains, I'm curious how dense and deep the canopy is. And granted, you guys are using double-endeds in a commercial environment, but still just interested to hear.
How deep the canopy is, I would say it's really okay. So we have 3 nets. We have always cleaned all the way up to the first net. There's no vegetation there for sure. Where most of it's cleaned out between that second and third net. There might be at the most 2 inches there, and then the whole distance between from the second net up to the top net and then past. That distance might be 18 inches, 18 to 20 inches. So plus another 2. So you're probably 2 feet, 2 feet to 2.5 feet, being real conservative.
And I mean, the buds are dense enough and you pack them in there
yeah.
enough that you hit those numbers. So it works out. So like, I don't think people need to get over zealous in how much canopy they want to keep. Some people are afraid to shave the legs. So taking off some and just leaving that 18 inches or, up to 2 feet if you want to be even a little bit conservative with it.
Well, the light in a commercial facility is a whole different ball game than what you're dealing with at home. I mean, it's like it's almost like outside. You just have to put a plant out there, and you get so good. It's more I think it's because the walls are so white, and then we're not being very efficient. We're just throwing shit tons of fucking light straight down and just filling the whole space with light.
Isn't that sort of like the LEDs kind of thought process now that they're all going to the strip style where there's like the inverse square law, the more basically points of light you have allows you to like basically raise it, or you can change the distance from the canopy and still get a good amount of coverage. But I'm curious, Doc, what are your thoughts on like how the commercial facilities light hits the plant versus like I know a 2x4 or a 4x4 or a 5x5, some of the LEDs now are made to smash that out, and these mylar walls have pretty high reflectivity. So I'm curious, how do you think they compare?
In terms of just the distribution of PPFD?
Like how the plant is reacting, because it's coming from a smaller space, I guess, in a tent. Like in Spartan's case with the commercial facility, the lights are on a ceiling, which is like 20 or maybe 10 feet away. And in your grow tent, the light has a similar principle, but it's hung at a closer distance. So I'm curious if you have thoughts on the
So
differences.
in a larger scale space, you're just going to have a more even distribution of high density light. In a smaller scale space, it's going to drop off towards the ends pretty much no matter what you do. You have to put so much more light than you actually need in a like 4x4 or 5x5 light space in order to get a really even distribution. So like the best fixtures, if you have 1,000 maximum in the middle, the very best 5x5 fixtures can keep the corners like, at 550 or 600 or something like that. Most of them can't even keep the corners above that. But if you're in a commercial space, you have neighboring fixtures that spill light over into what would have been the corner of that space. And those neighboring fixtures are better than mylar walls. So that's why you hang the lights up high. You just think about the total amount of PPF you need for the whole room. You hang the lights up high, you let the inverse square rule sort of spread the light out evenly across that whole space, and there won't be any variance. So I think the biggest phenomena is in a large commercial space, one plant to the next, they're all experiencing very similar PPFD. In any tent, the plant that's in the corner is going to be getting less light than the plants that are in the middle, right under the light. And it's not efficient to try to sort of change that too much. I just ran all the tests. I was doing this create the best par map with that adjustable par fixture, the Mars Hydro FCE 6500. And that's just why I kept coming back to it. It's like I can move a whole ton of light out towards the edges with that. But you just really lower the usable PPF. You lower the amount of light that reaches the canopy. So that's the big advantage of a larger space is you just it's more economical, it's more efficient to have an even spread of light.
So Aaron the grower and the American one, I haven't heard your guys' thoughts on this shaved leg situation. And then we have a pretty fun, interesting question after that.
I won't take too long because I agree with everything everybody said, and everybody's on point with everything they said. I will say that when I thin my plants, I basically create a mini copy of the plant inside the plant, about 1/5 the size of the plant, and that space is what I defoliate. So if it's like a Christmas tree shaped plant, I put a little Christmas tree cone of defoliation all the way down the plant. if that makes sense.
It sounds similar to what I just go in and I just pull off first 2 nodes and I just go on the inside, go back to the next. I just did a post on IG about it.
I just reshared that post. I was about to say that.
Yeah, I just clear all the insides out. Yeah, and I do that all the way up to close to the top.
It was something very visually demonstrated. So definitely check out Spartan Grown on Instagram if you want to see that post, because I like how he broke it down, and I like how he's got his plant like a little bit above the ground, but planted in the ground in the pot, like he's always talked about. He's a man who, he walks it like he talks it, so to speak. He,
real quick,
advice,
Spartan, how do you feel about defoliating like in like flower, like past week 21, like obviously 21, 20, 22, that's kind of like, go-to for most growers, I feel, for defoliating. But what if you like kind of like space it and you're talking day 30, day 35, and you can see that light's not penetrating? How do you feel about that?
So for me, I never know what day it is in flower outdoor. I can kind of guesstimate by looking at the plant. But for me, when I do a defoliation, it's usually because I can't see through the plant when I'm looking through, which means there's not enough airflow. So usually the defoliation is all mold prevention, IPM kind of thing. It's not usually for any other reason. It's usually for those reasons. And so I will do, that's top priority to me. I will do that anytime. I'll do that day before harvest. I'll do that. In fact, I strip all the fans off right before harvest anyway, but I'll strip leaves if I feel like it's too thick. It feels like I'm out there on my outdoor gardens when I had just 12 plants. I would be out there. I always made this joke. As soon as you start to defoliate, you'll never stop, because it'll take you maybe a day to get through the plant, and then you go to the next plant. And by the time you get done to the last plant, the first plant needs it again. So it was like almost an everyday thing for me for a while.
That's how they paint the Golden Gate Bridge. They start it, and then by the time they finish it, I swear to God, they have to restart it. That's how they do it.
That's a great answer, and that's exactly how I do it too. I just do it as I go, but I just don't know if that's what everybody else does. I just have always just instinctually done that. So awesome.
Yeah, man, it's the same way I do it.
The American one.
Let me give you my. I think a lot of the skirting thing has to be strain dependent, because I've seen people right before they put in a flower, they'll strip everything. There'll be one little sprig. I mean, it'll just be stems and like 5 leaves at the tip. Like I think the World's Last Hope did it once, and I was like, he's crazy. But then that particular strain will grow 3 feet of buds from that spot. So I say you got to go like that. Everybody's right. Like Doc said, use the light. So if you think you have a 3 foot, 2 foot, whatever you think that light is going to handle the penetration, you could lollipop up to where you leave that much space. But like I'm saying, strain dependent. Some strains will add 3 feet on in flower, and some strains will add 1 foot in flower. So I think you have to take a whole bunch of things into consideration. But most importantly is the light. If the light doesn't get to the lower ones, you may as well cut them out. So
Yeah,
that's my take, pretty much.
I agree with you, man. And I think that's why I tell people to don't worry about the strain dependence so much. The strain dependence thing works itself out, because as you run in the same environment that you have, the ones that are working in that environment, you're not going to keep anyway. You're going to just cut that plant out.
And if it grows 3 feet, and you could cut more branches off as it, the light doesn't reach down far enough. You could always take more off. You can't glue them back on. So you could be a little more hesitant if you want, I would say too,
Good points. We have a really interesting and funny question. I love this one from Chris Webb. You are what you eat. If I give my worms nothing but pink food, covering all NPK and macros, fed to cannabis over time, could I potentially create a pink strain? Does it work like that?
No.
To a certain extent, it might depend on why the food was pink in the first place, but the answer is generally going to be no.
I like his answer better. It's more nuanced. It's true.
I will say that if you eat just like only carrots, there's been the occasional person who starts to turn a little orange.
That happened to my grandmother.
Yeah,
twice.
I was gonna say, there's studies about aluminum increasing blue, so there is something to be said for this, but it's very particular.
Yeah, sequestration is usually the thing. I was just looking at a photo on Twitter this person was sharing two different caterpillars. One of them was I think it was on one plant, another one was on another, and in one plant it was able to sequester. Essentially this was having to sequester the color, the pigments, and it turned a very similar shade of the plant. Whereas on a different plant host, it was like bright yellow. It wasn't able to do that. So it's usually pretty context dependent. And sometimes, like Aaron says, you have to have additional stuff.
Like when people put food coloring in like the water, and a white rose will take up some of that water and it'll start to take on the color of whatever they put in there. I think that's what maybe CJ Webb's thought was there. But we have another question from TJ Richmond, because I think we've kind of gotten past the pink question there, but with as much nuance as we possibly can. Hey everyone, question for the panel. I'm in the middle of my first indoor flowering cycle. Is there a benefit to an even longer dark period than 12 hours, say 11-13 or 10/14?
I jumped on this in chat. I said if they were flowering under 12 hours of darkness, there's no benefit to increasing the darkness. I know that you like to run 13 hours of dark, Jack, but I think that is something that you would do right off the bat, right?
Yeah, I tried one harvest doing 12-12 for like the first 2 weeks or 3 weeks, just to see if maybe the stretch would be so much more productive that I'd want to always run 12-12 and then dial it back to 11-13 to like finish and give it more of like a simulating nature kind of effect. One, it was a little more work, something for me to remember, to be perfectly honest. I fucking hate adjusting my timer. I'm probably going to I just saw somebody said that you can get those little plugs fairly cheaply, the like Wi-Fi plugs, and I'll probably set up all my lights on those because it seems like a lot more reliable. And if I could just set that to a timer, it'd be easier to change and adjust and not sometimes malfunction, like if you bump it, because I use the pin timer still, where you like press it down. I guess I'm old fashioned.
Oh, wow, that's old school, man.
Yeah, I love them because once you get it dialed in, it works perfectly and it'll be set exactly how I want it or whatever.
You just can't coordinate them. I mean, if you have two different timers, like controlling two different things, they're off by like a minute or two. It's very hard to get them exactly synced.
Mine are 15 minutes off, thankfully, on purpose, because I do the sunrise and sunset with my reds. The reds come on 15 minutes before, stay on the whole cycle, and then they do the sunset 15 minutes after, and then the white light comes on basically just for the 11 hour
This is actually an interesting thing I've been thinking about lately. I don't mean to derail the conversation, but that whole sunrise thing is an interesting thing I've been thinking about lately.
I love the sun set more so than anything, because like Spartan has mentioned and many others have in the past, as opposed to going from like total intense light, even like a dimming it to total darkness, you can help your plants not go into basically much higher humid space. You're allowing the environment.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also think at the sunrise, I test a lot of lights. Every single light turns on about 10% stronger than it stabilizes at. And during the first half an hour, if you ever watch one of my videos, I always say I have to wait half an hour for the light to warm up. During that first half an hour, a light would start at 1100 and come all the way down to 1000 in that half an hour, because the diodes are so much more efficient when they're cold. So I was just thinking about that, when the lights turn on in your tent, if you turn them on full blast right away, you're blasting them with like more light than they get at noon. Right at the first light is like the most light they get all day. And I think that's one of the big advantages of the controllers that gradually ramp the lights off, is they avoid that sort of warm up spike that brings the plants really too much light when the lights first turn on.
I wanted to bring this up if we would talk about lights. We did. So a recent research report came out by Kasuma, Westmoreland, Jen, and Bruce Bugbee. And the title is called "Photons from Near-Infrared LEDs Can Delay Flowering in Short-Day Soybean and Cannabis, Implications for Phytochrome Activity." And although I'll be honest, I didn't go over it in great detail. It was just an interesting thing to see crop up, because I know
what wavelength were they dealing with there?
Let me check, and I can send this to anyone who would be interested in the report. But let me just. I
usually try to go through Bugbee stuff, but I haven't seen that one yet.
Far red photons greater than 700 nanometers re-induce flowering when applied after a pulse of red photons during the dark period. However, far red photons at sufficiently high intensity and duration delay flowering in sensitive species. Mechanistically, this response occurs because phytochrome red absorbance is not zero beyond 700 nanometers. Yeah, and they said that we applied nighttime photons from near infrared LEDs at a peak of 850 nanometers over a 12-hour dark period. Flowering was delayed in glycine max, which is soybean, and cannabis
They're running
sativa.
the 700 plus during the dark cycle.
That's correct. And I guess by 3 days and 12 days respectively. So as the flux of photons from NIR LEDs was increased up to 83 and 116 moles per meter squared or per second, this suggests that long wavelength photons from near infrared LEDs can activate phytochromes and thus alter plant development. That's what they said.
So like if you have a bunch of security cameras with a bunch of little infrared lights and they create 116 micromoles of PPFD on your canopy during the 12-hour dark period, it will delay your flowering time starting in certain species, maybe even cannabis.
The numbers there seem like a lot. Yeah. So I'm wondering how much IR light they were hitting the plant. So it's an interesting article, Matt. I'll look into it. Maybe
I would say this.
well, by the time I come back in a few weeks, I'll
It wouldn't shock me if the whole claim of like, oh, IR takes a week or 2 weeks off of flowering. I've never observed that directly running the little red, and in my setup, the red that I'm running is while the other lights are on, not during a dark period. And it's such a small fraction of the overall light that
it's insufficient. I don't know about that as much as the initiating the flowering period. So the idea that if you hit the plants with like 7:30, when the lights go out for half an hour, that you can leave them under darkness for only like 8 hours and still be in flowering. That's the sort of red triggering response for the photo period, that it basically allows you to have the dark period be shorter.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about that is I thought about implementing it, but and maybe this is because I run a little bit too much or a lot of light in my space, I've never underclocked my light. I've always been either too much or like right on the money. And so with being able to apply, pretty high amount of light efficiently in my space, I don't mind sacrificing the 1 hour because I feel like the amount of yield that I lose, I can somewhat say I make up for in potential quality, because I do think that having that longer dark period, it allows the and this is my own speculation, I have no data to support this at all. This is just how I feel about in my cultivation experience. I think having 1 extra hour of darkness allows the plant to maybe recover more. Maybe it's using that time to make more terpenes or flavonoids or cannabinoids that are appealing to me. And even sometimes I think it allows maybe some of that expression that we often talk about, like the purples and the blues and the different colors that come out in cannabis, I think can be maybe somewhat tied to the dark period.
Yeah, and I think that there's a love-hate relationship between the cannabinoids and high-intensity light too. So as long as you're giving the plants enough energy during the 24-hour cycle, having time when they're not getting their terpenes burned off and their cannabinoids burned off is probably helpful.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that it's important to consider, again, sort of like what's happening physiologically, like the difference between sort of inducing the production of these things, but also whether or not maybe through other means and processes you might be diminishing the results of that, because there's all these various influences happening at once that people have to consider. And I think when people, this is a +1 article, and it's just one example of this, and I'm not saying that's wrong or right or whatever.
Yeah,
but
no, it's interesting.
When people bring up this research, I think it's really important to consider the entirety holistically of what you're trying to do in your production space, before trying to be like, oh, well, this must necessarily mean that I need to fill up on near infrared light and really maximize this or something like that. Try not to like take from one article and expand it out to like an entire production regime, because it might not pan out, and there might be ways.
I agree. And this one in particular seems to be a pretty specialized application of something. It's not that most growers would probably want to follow this. It's just that it reveals interesting information that we can tweak other kinds of practices as a result of, potentially.
100% agree with that. Yeah. So cool. So it's a little cool thing.
Yeah, no, it conforms. I think that, 730, the combination with the far red and the near red for the Emerson effect is one aspect of that. But the far red really does do stem elongation. I was talking to an engineer at a grow light company about sort of how they decide how much chips to put in and how much of the power to drive to the different spectra. And he was explaining that they put the most IR chips in their smallest light because, and the littlest light that they make has like twice as many IR chips as the next biggest one. And he's like, it's because it's really for seedlings. And those people that are using those small lights is primarily for seedlings. And for the larger flowering plants, we put very little infrared light of the 730s in there, like less than 1% of the power draw. So it definitely conforms to that understanding about sort of the benefits of the far red light. It's not what you want to be focused on during the flowering period. That would be, to the extent that there's a spectrum that really helps with the sort of cannabinoid or the ripening or whatever else, that would be the UVs. And the research there is a little bit inconclusive, but it certainly seems that there's something. But giving the extra IR light during the flowering period is not generally a good idea.
Definitely some interesting stuff with the IR and UV, or more so on the UV, I guess, coming out of like MyGrow has posted a few things lately just about cannabinoid increases and terpene increases in certain studies. So it's cool to see that. I think that's definitely going to be sort of bleeding edge and implemented in certain cultivation environments where hopefully they don't have people in there ever when those lights are on, or they can set up a time where it just, works well within their cultivation. But I see a lot of people starting to try and implement that, and I could definitely see it benefiting the plants as far as secondary metabolite production, but not being the primary source of light by any means. Some people want to get
Also
real
friendly.
Absolutely.
Friendly reminder that like and we've talked about this before, but when you're looking at lights, don't use wattage as like a proxy for good or bad, right? We've gone over this many times, and MJ Coco definitely talked about this many times. But I was recently hearing about, I guess, people using a light that was like a massive amount of wattage for like a small 4x4 space or something like that. And like some people were asking, well, couldn't you just mitigate that by turning down the by dimming the lights or something like this?
Are you talking about FOS and POP?
Am I? I'm not sure.
Poetry,
probably
yeah.
1,000 watt over a 4x4.
Yeah,
That's
I
what
saw
I
that
heard.
drama. A lot of memeage going on over there.
Oh wow, okay.
And he's dimming it though?
No. It's just some people were saying, well, could that be mitigated that way? And I just wanted to articulate that like your light draws the power, and it doesn't, and dimming the lights doesn't change the draw necessarily, because I think don't you need a governor to do that? A governor?
No, if you dim the light, it lowers the power draw.
Oh, does it? Well, there you go. That's what I wanted to confirm.
But Matthew, with the light that they were probably using, I would imagine it's 1,000 watt HPS, and when you do dim it, it changes the spectrum, and it does.
Is it an HPS?
No,
I thought it was an
wasn't
LED.
It was an
Okay,
LED.
never
It
mind.
was a 1,500 watt that they stuffed in a 4x4.
1,500 watts.
Yeah, I'll go see if I can find a link to
That's
that.
insane.
Well, you can't support the PPFD. So people think sometimes that it's just a matter of heat or whatever. But if you put way too much PPFD into a place, you're just going to toast your plants. If you dim it down, then you're not running a 1,500 watt light. I mean, I just tested a 1,000 watt light dimmed to 80% in a 5x5 space because I thought some people might want to buy it and run it in that if they didn't have supplemental CO2, because if you were going to run this light at full power, you would need supplemental CO2. So there's reasons to do that. If somebody's just giving their plants like 2,500 ppfd, they're going to end up with dead plants.
Okay, well, that's good to confirm, because I understood it to be different, that the wattage would change, or that it wouldn't change in some instances or something like that. But
yeah, you're actually, when you dim it, you're dimming the driver itself, is you're telling you. And reading the power meter, if you don't have a quantum meter, Reading the power meter is a fairly accurate way of determining how much you're actually dimming. Just to be aware that the light becomes more efficient when you dim it. So if your power reading is half of what it used to be, your light is going to be about 55 to 60% of full power, not exactly half. You sort of gain efficiency as you dim the fixture, which is one of the reasons that you would do that. If you can afford the upfront purchase cost price, because generally it's more expensive to buy a light that, you know, has more LEDs and could deliver more power. But if you then run it dim, the advantage there of putting these big, you know, the 1500 watt light that he's running, I can almost guarantee you is in a 120 by 120 centimeter frame, because that's a standard size for shipping. And that is 120 centimeters is 4x4. So there's no gap around the outside of it. That fixture's hitting up wall to wall. And it's got a ton of diodes distributed all over the you know, the array. You dim them down, you can get incredibly good distribution of density exactly where you want. And since the LEDs are more efficient at a lower wattage, you're actually getting a more efficient light. The drawback from that is it's a more expensive upfront purchase cost because you're buying a bigger light. That doesn't necessarily sound what this person is doing. It sounds like what they're running it at full power, like way too much light in way too small of a space. Is that right?
I'm not sure on this one, but Brandon Rust, he got those photon techs, which are, I would consider like affordable. They're not like a budget, like something that you wouldn't want to use. It's a good quality light for a fair price, in my opinion. And he said that in his shipping containers, he's doing racks. Granted, he has two on top of each other, rows, but he said he's got them dimmed down to have his best results. And he runs pretty high, you know, power. He used to run a pretty high powered LED indoor operation, and I think he was surprised by just how much light some of these lights can put off, and maybe even how little you need to drive these lights, because like you were just talking about, they're more efficient when driven a little bit less. And if the plants are responding well and you can give them less light and you're still hitting the yields you're going for, that's like the best of all worlds. Like if you don't want to buy the light that's too big and have too much of an upfront cost, but I got a little bit too big for my space, and then I can always, like, for the plants that really love it, crank it, and for the ones that don't, I just let it kind of hang out in like middle to like 75% range and just see how they go.
Yeah, this is more like how people buy cars, right? You buy a car that can go like 150 miles an hour. That doesn't mean that you actually drive it 150 miles an hour. And a lot of people like the big engines and all this stuff, even though they're never going to use all of that capacity, right? But it's there. It's there for you if you need it. And it does allow you to get much better distribution. Running a dim like that also increases the longevity. So it increases the efficiency and the longevity. You can get excellent distribution of wonderful density light. The drawback is just the upfront purchase cost.
I gotta say, shout out to HLG and to Timber Grow lights. I've been running them both for years, slightly dimmed in some circumstances, or like very dimmed in my veg space, the HLG 65. And those things just run so true, and I've never had an issue with either of them. They have great distribution of light, good build quality, great customer service, both American manufactured. So shout out to those two companies. They've treated me very well and grown tons of, literally not tons, but pounds of medicine for myself and my wife. And just got to say thanks to them. Again, not sponsored at all, but they've definitely done great in my garden. I know, Spartan, you're on some, do you still run your HLGs? I know you've got Science over there now too.
Yeah, mostly all HLG except for, yeah, I have a Science LED in the flower room, an HLG in there. Then in my veg room, I have, I've got a old Spectrum King 100 watt, like closet case hanging in there, but it's not even plugged in right now. But I use it when I need extra light. So I still have that. I think that's probably my oldest light, that old Spectrum King. That's hilarious.
I was going to say, what's your oldest LED and how is it performing? I was going to say, what's your oldest HLG actually? Because what's your oldest still in production, and how's it performing now?
So my oldest HLG is the version 1, the 550 version 1. And that's in my flowered, or my, not flower, my tent that I have for the moms, and then in the autos. And then the oldest one though is got to be Oh, I do. It's not. Yeah, it's not working. I mean, it's just in storage. But I have a 315 ceramic metal halide that I don't use. But yeah, my oldest LED is that Spectrum King I was telling you about, that 100-watt light. Oh
It's
no,
nice
I
to
have a
know that
Spectrum
they.
King. I have a Spectrum King, and it's LED, a Spectrum King clone light that I think's even older. You know, it hangs above the cloner. It's just a little bar.
It is amazing how long some of them can last and continue to perform. Maybe not at 100%, but pretty close to, whatever is needed to grow your plants.
Yeah. Yeah. Way better than having to replace bulbs, that's for sure.
Doc, what do you think about that? With all these new lights coming out, everything gets a little bit more efficient. It's kind of like phones. Like each year, you get a little bit better camera, megapixels, things like that. But now, with lights, they're kind of lasting so long. Do you think that people should use them for a little bit and then try and maybe flip them, or just buy one and
Depends
then
on
hang
what
on
you
to it?
got. I mean, if you're running blurples or HPS, I think that it's worth upgrading, because the efficiency, you can literally double the efficiency now of blurple lights or the HPS, to get a more high efficiency LED. And the high efficiency LEDs have come down so dramatically in cost. It's still a tough call. It depends on how much you're running. It depends on what your goals are and all these things. But if you run the math on just the efficiency savings, it usually makes sense to do it over the course of just a couple of grows to upgrade, from blurple or from HPS. If you're running pretty much any full spectrum LEDs that are getting, at least like 1.5 micromoles per watt or something, then it might not be time to upgrade yet. It depends. And I think everybody's going to sort of run the numbers on their upfront costs and how important it is to sort of lay out that money now. This depends on what economists would call your discount rate. How valuable those upfront costs are you compared to the amount of money that you pay out in electricity over the course of the run. The other thing is you can get a better harvest, not necessarily because you're getting better quality light, but because you're getting a better distribution of light.
How much is that FOS, that 1500 there you're looking at, Jack?
Yeah, I just want to say quickly
I don't
that
know. You have
the
to ask for pricing.
manufacturer says it's for high bay, single level cultivation. So they're not advertising it's putting a 4x4 tent. But
Yeah,
I think in that meme and all that stuff, they were like, yeah, someone had it in a 4x4 tent, I think. So
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense. And I think that it was a circumstantial thing. But
I gotta say this. Dr. Photon, my partner, is doing the same thing almost. I got him one of the Photon Tech XT 1000 watt CO2 Pros, and he stuck it in a 4x4 tent. He's running it at 75% with 8 bars. Because the Photon Tech, you can remove there. It's normally a 10 bar fixture, but you can remove 2 of them. And he's having easily the best harvests he's ever had. He's really sort of pegged out to the maximum amount of light you can put in that space. So that's the example that we've sort of been doing this lately. I'm probably going to set up a very similar grow here in a few weeks when I set up my next grow. I'm not going to do a 4x4. I'm going to do a 5x5, but I'm going to put too much light in it and run it dim. And try to get this sort of the best distribution of light at about a 1000 micromole maximum.
What do you
that
put in
light
there,
is like
Doc? Are you gonna-
$3,500, by the way.
Oh, great.
If not
Yeah.
more. Yeah, I looked it up.
Yeah, that's insane.
Are you putting
Way
that
more than 1
Easy
gram
8
per
in there,
watt.
Doc?
What's that?
Are you going to end up putting that Easy 8000 watt fixture in that 5x5 space you're talking about?
I actually have 2000 watt fixtures right now. I have the Easy 8. I just tested the Easy 8, by the way. Aaron did really well.
Yes.
I just tested it yesterday, and I ran a second dimmed test this morning. That was the one that I was talking about when I said I just tested one dimmed at 80% in a 5x5. Yeah, no, I think I'm going to end up giving that one away. I did this giveaway during my last Grow Light premiere, and like during the premiere, I did a giveaway, and it got a bunch of people to come to the premiere. So I've decided that's pretty much what we're going to do with the Grow Lights that I test. Is I'm going to give them away during the video premiere on YouTube. So I don't think I'm going to keep that one.
I always wondered how effective that kind of a thing is. So
It makes
that's
people show
interesting
up.
to hear.
They want the light.
Yeah.
Shit.
Yeah,
Spartan
yeah,
grown.
so
I
it seemed that
guess
it
so.
led to people showing up right then, and then it led to like more people subscribing to my channel to be part of the next one. So, and
So
I
what's
think the word still has to travel out there. You know, if everybody knows that I'm doing giveaways every time I premiere a video, they'll probably show up. And now I just told 150 new people.
We gotta
What's
say
the 1,000 watt
peace
that
out
you're
to
gonna
Spartan
keep?
Grown, guys. He's got 15
Oh.
minutes before he goes to Michigan Bros Grow Show, so I just want to give him a chance to get some water, refill his tray, and let the dogs out if he needs to.
Later, Spartan.
See you
Grow love,
guys.
Spartan.
I don't even know what to say here. So I just love to hang with you guys. Fucking awesome hanging in the chat. And I'm getting the fuck out of here. See you guys.
Peace
Later,
out,
man.
Spartan.
You can find him at Spartan Grown, spartangrown@gmail.com. Thank you so much for joining us, Spartan Grown. Peace out.
Doc,
Uh,
what light would you recommend for a guy who doesn't know anything about a tent for a 4x4 tent? Like, you know what I mean? Like a guy like me. I've never really grown in a tent, not much, and I'm thinking about doing it because I want to do a pheno hunt, and I don't want to break the bank, and I don't know anything about LEDs. So,
The best budget option that's out there right now is still the Metagrow Fold 8. Check out that video that I did a while ago. It's like the cheapest light. It does really well. And we've got like 100 people that have it now that are all reporting really good results with it. So I'm feeling good about that one. That's the Easy 8 is from that same company that I'm testing that light too. And it did well too. The Mars has some really good fixtures now too that are cheap, and both the FC and the FCE series. The Photon Tech are awesome fixtures that Jack brought up. Their 465 is an awesome 4x4 grow light. It depends to some extent on, if you're looking for just like the cheapest light to get the most micromoles out of it. If you want something that's a little bit sort of better quality, if you want different brand names for some of the components or things like that. But if I was buying a light for my 4x4 tent, I think it would be hard for me to spend more money than the Metagrow Fold 8 right now, just because of sort of the results that are coming back on that. Comes out to be like 33 cents per micromole. It's just an unbelievable deal.
what's it called?
The 1,000 watt?
What's it called again?
It's the Metagrow Fold 8. Check out my video on that on my YouTube channel. It's one of my only grow light videos that has gotten age restricted. So nobody's ever seen it. It's got like the lowest view count of any of my videos because it got age restricted for some silly reason. But check it out on my channel. I do several par tests with that in both a 5x5 and in a 4x4 tent.
Awesome, man.
impressive.
So what's the 1,000 watt that won the like you're gonna keep it?
That's the Photon Tech. Photon Tech XT 1000 watt CO2 Pro. I tested that one back in April, I think, and I did a really long video on that where I really got into sort of the heat issues, removing bars versus dimming. One of the things I like about the Photon Tech lights is it's a 10 bar light, but you can take two of the bars out, and that created such an amazing distribution in the 5x5 space. So there's cool sort of different things. That's probably what I'm going to do. I'm going to run 1,000 watt light, but I'm going to leave two of the 100 watt bars out. So it's only going to be an 800 watt light, and put it in the 5x5 grow space. And that's just going to be close to perfect.
It's amazing, the new LEDs. I'm not brand loyal necessarily to any one of them. I think a lot of them are doing really good. Get the one that's the best price right now. I think it's the Metagrow Fold 8. But for the smaller spaces, like I had somebody who just started growing in a 2x4, and that Dr. MJ had a great video of I think it's the Mars SP3000.
Yeah.
It covers it like edge to edge, even though it's not as efficient micromole, as some of the most current ones. The spread of light on it is so good in that grow space. Like if you just buy a 2x4 tent and that light, that you've got it pretty well covered from edge to edge. And I know the person who's growing with it has it dimmed all the way down, and it's still like a lot of light for the plants, and they're growing really vigorously. The light is least of the issues. They're having other watering and trying to keep the nutrients uptake with it, but that light is amazingly a bit capable of producing light in a small space.
And that's what I did. After I tested, I was like, damn. I mean, I had been growing in a 4x4 before that, a fully lit 4x4. And I'm like, I think I could hit the same harvest targets out of a 4x2 with this light. And I came damn close to sort of matching my 4x4 yield, even though I stepped down to a 4x2. So yeah, I agree with you there, Jack. That's a good setup.
You did light mechanics where you hung them side by side, and if you do have a 4x4, bring 2 of those. Oh, my connection's unstable. Hopefully I'm not cutting out too bad.
He did a little bit, but I think we got you. Yeah, 2 of them in a 4x4 was insane, and we know we got a bunch of growers that have put that. I think somebody that's running 2 SP3000s in a 4x4 was in the chat recently, but we'll see if they comment on that after I just called them out.
And yeah, they're see gardens runs like the Bloom Plus. I see people using spider farmers. I see a lot of people taking advantage of the and then
yeah, there's a bunch of little lights for 2x2 tents that are pretty good too. That it really depends on what you need. I mean, I think a 2x2 is enough for a lot of home growers that are really just growing for themselves. I think it would be enough for me, and I use a lot of cannabis, but I can grow pretty good plants too. But I think that, you know, it depends on what you need. And I know a lot of growers that are in the small tents, small little light, and just producing plenty for themselves. Other people want to produce sort of for economics.
Yeah, look, for me and my wife, my tent is a little bit too. If it was just myself, I'd be able to cover my needs. But like my growing in their 2x4, only crops per year allow more than all of their needs. So it's they can have like time off between harvests. They could grow from seed every time. Just it allowed them a lot of freedom. So I'm very thankful to be able to set them up. Basically, you know, simple, straightforward setup that I think a lot of people can adopt and get if they're growing, and if they're struggling, maybe try something like that. There's a lot of good guides out there like cocoforcannabis.com. I think we're coming up to the almost final hour. I'm just curious if anybody, Tao times will throw out a good question at the end, or if anybody else on the panel has final questions, thoughts, or comments on this week's.
Good thing we're coming to the end of this show, because it seems like you're running low on internet connectivity there on your end, Jack, but it's hanging in there just well enough.
Oh, well,
I want to shout out Smart Poker for being a great supporter of this channel. That's what I want to say. Smart Poker, you often supplement what we say with links. You often supplement things with good commentary, in my opinion. So I just want to shout that out. And I'm noticing you doing it just here with the Cocoa for Cannabis grow link, because people are talking about
Smart, man.
Yeah,
I think his girl is Crispy. Yeah, I do
Crispy
too.
Wannabe. She's awesome too. Shout out to Smart Poker.
We love Smart Poker and Crispy Wannabe.
They're great members of the communities. I'm happy that they're here this evening listening with us as per usual. They're just one of the many, you know, regular listeners. This name always cracks me up. Crack Babies DWC is another regular out there. So cheers to you and Fat Freddy's cat, Fried Piper. It's Sungrown 707. I met him in person. I mentioned you earlier on the show. Don't know if you were here for that part, but cheers to you. But yeah, seeing a lot come in the chat. I would like to sometimes throw out generalizations like, oh, you know, good enough, but sometimes there's still junky ones on Amazon and eBay, and people can still get duped into buying pretty garbage. So taking recommendations from your friends, seeing the people that are growing well and having success with them is definitely a good place to be.
Yes.
And lucky for me, I have all you guys, and lucky for all the growers here, man. They're listening. A lot of really good information coming from people like Dr. MJ and everyone here, man. So I'm privileged to be a part of it myself. So.
Yeah, and shout out everyone in chat, every single one of you listening. Awesome that you showed up and hanging with us.
Yeah, I think we had like 150 something. We got 127 now. If you haven't already smashed that thumbs up button, I think 80 of you did it. The other 50 or so are like myself, who can be absent-minded cannabis users at this moment. Or maybe you didn't like the show. Maybe you just like the show.
They're still contemplating whether or not it deserves the thumbs up. So hopefully they'll decide.
Everything can still go terribly wrong. They have their thumbs down ready.
They're like, all right, if this goes south, I'm not going to give it the thumbs up. We got to make it all the way through the 2 hours without Jack's connection fucking up too much or them going on to some crazy off topic for too long. But with that said, we got 5 minutes left, so I think that's a perfect time to start going around the panel and letting everybody do their final thoughts or shout outs. So, staff writer at Skunk Magazine, Matthew Gates, if you'd like to go ahead and tell the people where they can find you.
Yeah, you can find me in 3 main locations. You can find me on YouTube at Zenthanol, the same account I was commenting with Flo. And I have again, just a reminder, a video about the Eurasian hemp borer, Graphilia delineana. And there's not a whole lot of information. We're just starting to do a lot more research on it. The entire Tortrix moth group is actually really infamous for being incredibly destructive. And so it's no surprise to me that's causing so much problems for people in cannabis and other crops too. So if you want to find out about that, you can find that YouTube channel, that video. I just published it. You can also find me on Twitter at SyncAngel and on Instagram at SyncAngel as well.
Thanks as always for joining us. Next up, Noah the Grower.
Yeah, I had a great time. Feel like a donkey for not having followed Dr. MJ's page, but I remedied that, went over and followed it, looked at the video a little bit, just checked it out, seen one of your comments, Aaron the Grower's comments, and yeah, I know I'm Noah the Grower on Instagram, and I've been growing for a while, and I'm constantly learning and loving it, and I love this stuff. I'm a geek for it, and I got a bunch of seeds I'm getting ready to pop, and I'm gonna get I have a tent, and I'm gonna get a light, and I'm gonna start running through some gear, and we'll see it. I'll start posting my page and stuff, but yeah, had a great time, and I'll see you guys all next week.
See you next week, Noah. And something you said just kind of rang a bell in my head. And the fact that you're still growing and learning, and you've been doing it for a long time. I was listening to Subcools, the podcast, and thinking about some of the other breeders and like people like Frenchie who've passed recently in the community. And it is a tragic loss in its own way, but the beauty of it in one way is to think every one of them that I saw personally, until their very last day, loved cannabis, were still exploring, still learning, still being humbled by the plant and picking up new information all the time, meeting new people in the community and embracing others. And literally until their very last days, they were loving and passionate and always learning. So I think that's a great example for all of us to just keep on learning every single day in your life, no matter how old you are, no matter how much experience you have. It's always great to keep an open mind and follow your passions and do what you love. And Aaron the Grower, you are next up.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks, panel. I definitely echo that sentiment. You're never too smart to be humbled. So I love that about growing because, you know, the learning is never ending. I'm Aaron the Grower, ATG Acres on Instagram, YouTube, and atgacres.com. Check out my boy Kyle, pbreeding.com. We're doing big shit. So I'm really excited about that. Good to be here this week, guys.
It's awesome stuff. I can't wait to see it. And in the meantime, support. Get yourself a plant packer. Best way to send clones. Support Aaron the Grower and pbreeding.com. Kyle was with us earlier. Help those guys out on their way along. You, in a small way, can help make their dream happen. They're going to do it either way, but you can make it happen even faster by supporting them. Listening in is one way. Even just being here, being part of the community. A lot of you give us questions, feedback, things that will maybe trigger an idea for us later on or further research that makes us a better grower and allows us to be in the positions that we're in. So thank you all again, like everybody else has said. But next up, we have Dr. MJ.
Hey guys, it was fun to be back. When I don't do this show for a couple of weeks, I started to feel like, I was drifting off. I wasn't the same person. Like nobody would listen to me about plants anymore. Doing this show, I feel like is like an important part of my weekly ritual in order to stay like adequately plugged into the community. So I appreciate you, Jack, for keeping this thing running. I appreciate all the rest of the panelists for showing up. I appreciate all the chatters because, asking these questions and getting us chatting about things and just kind of interacting it makes it much more fun than if it was just the six of us or whatever chatting amongst ourselves. All that said, I am going to be moving in the next couple of weeks, so my attendance here may be somewhat spotty. I'll try to drop in next week if I can. The following week, I definitely won't be able to. I do have some YouTube videos coming up. I'm going to get the Viper Spectra video out this week, the new XS2000, and I'll be doing a giveaway during that premiere. Tested the Metagrow Easy 8, which is that big 1,000-watt fixture. I'll be doing a giveaway during that premiere too, but that might be like after the move, we'll see. We're also starting the Plant Training Grow Challenge right now at Cocoa for Cannabis. You can start your plants anytime you want to. We have the flip day. The designated flip day is October 1st. So it's still early. You don't have to start yet. You still have like 7-8 weeks or something until October 1st. But when it becomes time that's your veg time, go ahead, drop your seeds, get in that. We're doing giveaways on September 1st for a Photon Tech light and October 1st for a Medic Grow light. So check that out on my Instagram, and I'll shut up now because I've been rambling on. Love you all. Grower love. Thank you. And that's it.
Very, very well said. Thank you so much. And next up, we have the American one. So I don't forget anybody.
Jack, thanks for hosting again. And thanks for everyone on the panel. Shout out Kyle, Spartan, and Brandon, who are not here no more. But and shout out to everyone in chat. And yeah, I'm the American one on the YouTube and the American one _with _Keens on the IG. Most of you know me. And it was awesome hanging tonight. And I look forward to next week. Peace out, everyone.
Well said, the American one. Always a pleasure to have you. And on that note, I am at Jack Greenstock on Instagram primarily. You can also catch me on Cannabuzz, the cannabis-friendly social media app. Jack_Greenstock on Twitter. And if you want to email me, jackgreenstock47@gmail.com. You can get my book, 50 Strains of Green, at 50strains.com. Just 50 strains, no green, because there's going to be 50 strains of purple later this year. One thing I wanted to say before we go is just love and kindness, not just the grower love, but love and kindness is important in life. There's a lot of craziness still going on around the world, and people are sometimes being judgmental of each other for a myriad of reasons I won't get into. But I just think it's important to respect each other and love each other and be kind to each other, because there's a lot of craziness that tends to spring up. And if we can avoid that and just represent well as a community and keep that love and kindness moving forward, it definitely helps the world be a better place. So with that said, thank you all so much for coming. Jack Greenstock signing out.